Hi, I'm Mike Gant, and this is the Duty of a Man podcast. The last few weeks, and actually everything on the podcast is about the duty of a man, which is to not only order his life to Jesus Christ, but to order his family's life to Jesus Christ. He can't order the individuals. The wife and the children each have their own will, just like he has his own will. But it's the man's responsibility to form the family, to keep it together, to organize it. And so, the duty of a man is family. To be a real man is to be a family man. So today, the word I want to talk about is patriarchy. What kind of a word is patriarchy? Well, if you look it up in Merriam-Webster, it says a social organization marked by the supremacy of the father in the clan or family, the legal dependence of wives and children, and the reckoning of descent and inheritance in the male line, broadly controlled by men of a disproportionately large share of power. That's the first major definition. And the second is a society or institution organized according to the principles or practices of patriarchy. That wasn't really helpful. But the first thing is, the supremacy of the father and the clan and that sort of thing. And this begins to get at a point I wanted to make right off the bat, which is this word patriarchy is not an objective. It's hard to find an objective meaning to it, or it's hard to find someone who will use the word objectively. It's usually used as a pejorative, as a slur. Now, if you look up the etymology of this word, the first known usage of it that Google or that Merriam-Webster showed was 1632. But Google has this feature which gives more detail than a typical, or at least gives some additional detail to a typical etymology. And it's called the Ngram, N-G-R-A-M. And what they do is they graph the usage. Now, what all they're looking at, I presume it's a pretty wide variety of reading material. But they show how often the word has been used. The interesting thing about the word patriarchy is though it was first used in the 17th century, which, by the way, means that humanity got along for several thousand years before they needed that word. But when it was first used in the 17th century, if you look at that graph, it's basically flatlined until the 1970s. It's pretty close to zero. And all of a sudden, the 70s, it starts taking off. And then it really, between 1980 and the 2000s, it just shot up and sits very, very high because of that. And I think that, that word is primarily used by people who believe in feminism. So patriarchy is in effect a weapon that feminists use to try to establish a false, what is falsely normal. And what they're trying to do with that term is to stigmatize normalcy, because it's just been normal in the history of mankind that man has been, in charge or responsible for the family. And, men are generally bigger, stronger. It's just been part of nature. But of course, feminism is all about fighting nature. And it's really gotten to a fever pitch. I mean, the things that I share with you from the Bible about family, these were standard things. I mean, the problem when someone shared the way I do about family when I was a young man, when I would share them, a lot of people would respond to people from broader society when they hear teaching like that. Were like, why are you teaching that? Everybody knows that. You don't have to have it in the Bible. Everybody knows this is the way families work, and this is what makes for stable families, and families are important. And no, don't be absurd. Homosexuality is not legitimate marriage, and transgenderism, people couldn't even fathom that, I don't think. at least certainly not on some wide scale like it is now, wide societal scale. But now it's very different. You can't go to the institutions of society and find these ideas about our ideas about family reinforced. You can't go to the Boy Scouts, for example, anymore. They're not even Boy Scouts. They had to take the word boy out. And here is something that I saw just a couple of days ago. This article is in the New Statesman, which is a British publication. It leans left, like U.S. publications, Atlantic Monthly, Vanity Fair, stuff like that. But here's the headline: Pro-family rhetoric and its fascist resonances. Traditional gender roles have propped up authoritarian regimes of the past. And it starts off and says, after Joe Biden's most recent State of the Union address in March, Senator Katie Britt from Alabama gave the official GOP response from her kitchen table. Gives a number of specifics, and then it quotes her as emphasizing children, kitchen, and church. These were the foundations of Britt's speech. They were also, according to Nazi ideology, the central tenets of women's lives. And it gives the German version of those three words, Kinder, Kirch, probably not pronouncing any of that correctly. The article goes on a paragraph or so later. In Hitler's Germany, mothers were discouraged from entering the workforce and were even paid to stay at home with their children. This was, of course, spun as pro-family. But in reality, it was about incentivizing white, ethnically German women to reproduce and keeping them from gaining too much independence. And then the final paragraph, it's much longer than this. I'm just reading a few parts of it. Authoritarian ideologies are not exclusively right-wing, but right-wing authoritarianism has rarely existed without conservative gender roles to bolster, enable, and perpetuate it. The ideal woman as submissive homemaker and obedient childbearer, and the ideal man as dominant patriarch, there's that word patriarch, is a model that authoritarian regimes emulate in law and governance. It is a very old model, and it is one that is seemingly endlessly resurrected by men in search of total power. And so I must be a man in search of total power, because I think that the buck stops with the man in the family. I think the man bears the responsibility of making sure the family is safe and is provided for. But that's seeking total power. I'm just wanting you to know what you're up against, that the tides, the societal tides, and they're becoming more and more fiercely against the biblical model. And there's no sense, common sense is just not common in this age. It's becoming increasingly uncommon. And so we have to have a realistic view of how we're going to survive. As I said, feminism is using patriarchy as a way to make its point. And those don't even match up. You would think that feminism would be fighting masculinism, but no, it's not that. It's feminism versus patriarchy. Patriarchy includes masculine, but it also includes parenting, fathering, bringing children into the world. So feminism, by succeeding in its quest, pulls down not just the idea of men, but the idea of fathers. And society is suffering the effects of that, that belief system. Now, when I say fatherly authority, I'm talking about that, the father in the nuclear family. Like with our own children, when they got to adulthood, they're fellow adults. The time for me to be an authority over them was over when they became adults. So it's long been over, because our children have been adults for a long time. And even when I speak to our grandchildren, I never teach them about, well, you need to respect your grandfather. No, I tell them, you need to respect your father and your mother, and honor them. And whenever if I do correct them, which I try never to do in the presence of their parents, I do so only to reinforce what the parents are teaching them. What I should give my grown children is advice and counsel, be a listening board for them, but not to try to direct them. So this is not about clans and tribes and all that kind of stuff. This is about how you operate the nuclear family. And that's where things are going wrong. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in society in the next few years. I don't believe there's a political solution to what we face here in America, but there'll be something. Something's going to happen. Either, great catastrophe or revival or maybe both. In fact, it's more likely that there's both, because there's certain people that are going to cling to the ways that don't work right until the bitter end. But God's going to do a new thing. And in this new thing, when the old passes away and the old is judged, the new will spring forth. And so what I see happening, we've entered now a new age of patriarchs. Now, I don't really like that term for the reasons we've described. Patriarchy is definitely a pejorative term. Now, patriarchs has been used more benignly with respect to, great men of the early days of the Bible. So that's what this is going to be like, where men have to be like Noah and, build an ark to protect their family. Now, this ark will take different shapes and forms depending on the family. But they will all include the element of, reading the Bible, studying the Bible, practicing the Bible, living for Jesus. That will all be there. And every man will be not only like Noah, but he'll be like Abraham, and who has the promises of God. And Abraham had promises that God spoke to him, but we have all this in writing, and we have many, many promises, more promises than Abraham had, and greater promises than Abraham had. And so we've got to, whatever happens, whatever forms judgment takes, whatever calamities we withstand or we are required to endure, the things that I'm teaching you about Jesus Christ in the Bible will apply and will help you get through it. When families don't work and they have to go to the psychiatrist, one of the first questions the psychiatrist always asks is, tell me about your family of origin, because that's where all the problems start. And the more you can get right in the family of origin, the more you can get right in a human being's first 20 years, the better chance that human being stands the rest of his or her life. It's hard enough to do well in this world when you got everything going for you. So you certainly don't need more burdens by getting things off track early on. So just be aware that what you're doing is going to be mocked mercilessly. This article that I read from, this is typical. And these people are powerful now. They control major institutions. They're imposing mandates for, okay, you got to teach about sex in elementary school. You got to teach about the normalcy and legitimacy of the whole LGBT, every kind of perversion you can name. You got to have drag queens at the library, and now they're pushing them in the public schools. I've been seeing this now as an adult for 50 years, half a century. The direction has only been one way. I've heard calls for repentance in America, and still the direction has been only one way, and it's downward. Now, I still pray, I'm still hopeful, and I'm still going to look for God to his ways to prevail in our country with as many people as possible. But you got to recognize you're swimming upstream in order to even have half a chance to succeed. But if you're willing to do it, God will be with you, and you will overcome every single opposing force. And you'll be glad you did. Because greater love has no man than this, than one lay down his life for his friends. And what friends could be more important to a man than his wife and his children?